There is a condition so common among people over 60 that doctors have a name for it that tells you everything you need to know about why it is so dangerous. They call it the silent killer. Not because it is rare, because it causes serious, progressive damage to the brain and the heart for years, sometimes for decades, before the person feels a single symptom. It is high blood pressure. And while most people know it is bad for the heart, the vast majority have no idea that uncontrolled high blood pressure is one of the single most destructive forces acting on the aging brain, quietly damaging the blood vessels that feed the memory centers, accelerating the very changes that lead to dementia, and doing all of this in complete silence while the person goes about their daily life feeling perfectly fine. Today, I am going to explain exactly what high blood pressure does to the brain after 60, why so many people over 60 have it without knowing, what the warning signs look like from a cognitive perspective, and what you can do starting today to protect both your blood pressure and your memory. This is one of the most actionable videos I have made on this channel because high blood pressure is one of the most modifiable risk factors for dementia that exists. And modifiable means you have real power over it. My name is Dr. Elena, and every week I bring you practical, science-based information on cognitive health and memory for people over 60. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let's talk about something that may be happening inside your body right now without your knowledge. First, let me explain what blood pressure actually is and why it matters so much for the brain specifically. Because most people think of it as a heart problem, and that framing causes them to underestimate how much it affects their mind. Blood pressure is the force with which blood pushes against the walls of your arteries as the heart pumps it through the body. When that force is consistently too high, it does something very specific and very damaging over time. It injures the walls of the blood vessels. This injury triggers an inflammatory response. Scar tissue forms. The vessels become thicker, stiffer, and narrower. Blood flow decreases, and the organs that depend on that blood flow, the heart, the kidneys, and critically the brain, begin to suffer. The brain is the most blood-hungry organ in the body. It represents only about 2% of total body weight, but consumes roughly 20% of all the blood the heart pumps. Every region of the brain, including the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, and all the areas responsible for memory, attention, and reasoning, depends on a continuous, uninterrupted supply of oxygen-rich blood delivered through an extraordinarily fine network of tiny blood vessels called the cerebral microvasculature. When blood pressure is chronically elevated, these tiny vessels are the first to suffer. They are too small and too delicate to withstand the sustained mechanical pressure without damage. Over years, they develop microlesions, tiny areas of injury that disrupt blood flow to the brain cells they supply. The brain cells in those areas begin to die. The damage accumulates silently. On a brain scan, these areas show up as small white spots called white matter lesions or silent infarcts, signs of damage that the person never felt, never noticed, and never knew was happening. Research has found that people with uncontrolled high blood pressure have significantly more white matter lesions in their brains compared to those with healthy blood pressure, and that the number and extent of these lesions correlates directly with cognitive performance. More lesions mean worse memory, slower processing speed, and greater difficulty with complex reasoning. One landmark study that followed adults over 20 years found that people who had elevated blood pressure in their 40s and 50s, what is now called midlife hypertension, had significantly higher rates of dementia in their 70s and 80s, even if their blood pressure was controlled later in life. This is one of the most important findings in dementia prevention research of the past decade. The damage accumulates long before the cognitive symptoms appear. High blood pressure in your 60s is not just a problem for your 60s. It is shaping the brain you will have in your 70s and 80s. And that makes addressing it now, not eventually, not when symptoms appear, genuinely urgent. There is also a direct connection between high blood pressure and the amyloid plaques associated with Alzheimer's disease. Healthy blood vessels in the brain perform a cleaning function. They help clear amyloid beta proteins before they can accumulate into plaques. When those blood vessels are damaged by sustained high blood pressure, this cleaning function is compromised. Amyloid accumulates faster. The pathway to Alzheimer's accelerates. Now, let me tell you something that surprises many people. High blood pressure frequently causes no symptoms at all, which is exactly why it is so dangerous and why so many people over 60 have it without knowing. You cannot feel your blood pressure. You cannot feel it when it is normal, and in the early and middle stages of hypertension, most people cannot feel it when it is elevated either. The damage accumulates in complete silence. However, there are some cognitive and neurological signs that chronic hypertension may be affecting the brain, signs that people often attribute simply to aging or stress. The first is a persistent sense of mental fog that does not clear fully even after a good night's sleep. The second is increasing difficulty with tasks that require holding multiple pieces of information in mind simultaneously, following complex conversations, managing finances, planning activities with several steps. The third is a subtle but noticeable slowing of thinking, not dramatic, but a sense that the mind moves less quickly and less fluidly than it used to. The fourth is headaches, particularly in the morning or at the back of the head, which can be associated with blood pressure elevation during the night. And the fifth is increasing emotional reactivity, irritability, anxiety, or low mood that seems disproportionate to circumstances, which can reflect the impact of vascular changes on the brain regions that regulate emotional response. None of these signs is diagnostic on its own, but if several of them are present alongside a blood pressure reading that is consistently above 130/80, which is the current threshold for hypertension according to major medical guidelines, that combination deserves serious medical attention. Now let us talk about what you can actually do. And I want to be very specific here, because the research on lifestyle interventions for blood pressure is genuinely strong, and the cognitive benefits of bringing blood pressure under control are real and measurable. The first intervention is sodium reduction. And I want to give you a more nuanced picture than simply telling you to eat less salt. The most significant sources of sodium for most people over 60 are not the salt shaker on the table. They are processed and packaged foods. Canned soups, deli meats, bread, cheese, condiments, and restaurant meals collectively account for roughly 70% of the sodium in the average diet. Reading labels and choosing low-sodium alternatives in these categories has a far greater impact on blood pressure than removing the salt shaker from the table. The target for people over 60 with hypertension is generally below 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day, less than 1 teaspoon of salt total from all sources combined. The second intervention is the DASH diet, an eating pattern specifically designed and clinically tested to lower blood pressure. DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. It emphasizes vegetables, fruits, whole grains, lean proteins, and low-fat dairy while limiting red meat, saturated fats, and added sugars. Studies have found that following the DASH diet consistently can lower systolic blood pressure by 8 to 14 points, a reduction comparable to what some medications achieve. It is not a restrictive or complicated diet. It is essentially a Mediterranean-style eating pattern with particular attention to potassium-rich foods like bananas, sweet potatoes, spinach, and avocado, nutrients that actively help relax blood vessel walls. The third intervention is regular physical movement. We have discussed exercise in multiple previous videos for its cognitive benefits, but its impact on blood pressure deserves specific mention here. Regular aerobic exercise, even walking at a brisk pace for 30 minutes, 5 days per week, can lower systolic blood pressure by 5 to 8 points in people with hypertension. The mechanism is direct. Aerobic exercise makes the heart more efficient, reduces the stiffness of blood vessel walls, and promotes the production of nitric oxide, the molecule that helps blood vessels relax and widen. Consistency matters far more than intensity. A daily 30-minute walk produces better blood pressure outcomes than occasional intense exercise sessions. The fourth intervention is stress reduction, and here the connection to blood pressure is biochemical, not metaphorical. Cortisol and adrenaline, the hormones released during stress, directly constrict blood vessels and raise blood pressure in the short term. Chronic stress means chronically elevated levels of these hormones, which means chronically elevated blood pressure. The breathing technique we discussed in our stress video, 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 6 to 8 counts out, produces measurable reductions in blood pressure within minutes and, practiced daily, lowers baseline readings over time. Protecting sleep, managing social connection, and reducing compulsive phone use, all topics we have covered in previous videos, also contribute to lower cortisol and therefore lower blood pressure. The fifth intervention is knowing your numbers. This sounds obvious, but studies consistently show that a significant proportion of people with hypertension are unaware of it, because they have not had their blood pressure checked recently, or because readings taken at the doctor's office during stressful moments do not reflect their true baseline. Home blood pressure monitors are inexpensive, accurate, and widely available. Checking your blood pressure at the same time each morning, before coffee, before activity, after 5 minutes of sitting quietly, gives you a true baseline reading that is far more informative than an occasional in-office measurement. If your readings are consistently above 130/80, Speak with your doctor. If medication is recommended, take it seriously. The evidence that blood pressure medication reduces dementia risk when blood pressure is genuinely elevated is strong and consistent. Let me bring it all together. High blood pressure is the single most common modifiable risk factor for both stroke and dementia in adults over 60. It damages the tiny blood vessels that feed the brain's memory centers, creates microlesions that accumulate silently over years, disrupts the brain's natural cleaning mechanisms, and accelerates amyloid accumulation. The cognitive signs that it may be affecting your brain include persistent mental fog, difficulty with complex tasks, slowing of thought, morning headaches, and increased emotional reactivity. And the 5 interventions that have the strongest evidence: reducing sodium, particularly from processed foods, following the DASH eating pattern, doing regular aerobic movement, managing chronic stress actively, and knowing your blood pressure numbers through regular home monitoring. High blood pressure is not an inevitable consequence of aging. It is a modifiable condition, and every point you bring it down is a point of protection for the brain you are living in right now, and the brain you will be living in 20 years from now. If this video helped you see the connection between blood pressure and brain health in a new way, please share it. It is exactly the kind of information that can change a health decision, and health decisions compound over time. Subscribe to the channel for a new video every week on cognitive health and memory after 60. And leave me a comment. Do you monitor your blood pressure at home? Or is this something you have been meaning to start? I read every single comment. See you in the next video.